We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to Zencaster.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled. Hard to believe it, but it is time to transition out of our Deadpool and Wolverine era and into our Agatha All Along coverage. So before we dive into our official predictions, we are just going to give a little bit of background on the main witches that have been identified to date based on cast lists and things like that for the show, because otherwise I feel like our predictions episode would probably be like a bajillion hours. And so we're just going to focus on characters only. Maybe a theory or two is going to get tossed in, but nothing crazy, because that will be very much the focus of next week's episode, where we're diving deep into the trailers and theories and all that good stuff. But hopefully this context from today will help inform both you and us as we move into our predictions and our Agatha All Along coverage as a whole. So we're going to kick off with Agatha herself, and I'm actually going to take this and start the episode for a little bit of a change of pace. Y'all probably know Agatha from WandaVision, but because we were not officially a show at the time, we didn't cover Agatha or WandaVision or any of the characters around it, so we felt like it was a good time to just level set and give a little bit of background on Agatha. So I think one of the first things that struck me when I was learning about her was she actually takes care of Franklin Richards, which is Reed and Sue Richards, Sue Storm's son. So interesting little synergies, knowing that we have the Fantastic Four coming around the bend, that she also has ties to them. She is a familiar named Ebony. In the comics, she goes against Immortus. She helps guide Wanda, which I think we saw maybe a little bit of kind of two-way manipulation in WandaVision. And she's just a super, super powerful witch. She was there during the Salem witch trials. And yeah, I think that kind of covers it based on, what we've already seen in WandaVision, but didn't want to leave out our main lady and our main character before we dive into some of these newer and different characters that we haven't seen before.
Well, and the only thing I'll add, because hi everyone, I am here too. But the only thing I will add too is, let's not forget, for those of you who maybe, haven't watched WandaVision since 2021, or you haven't actually watched it. There are plenty of people who I'm sure have not. Agatha is one of the, I want to say rare because it's kind of been implied that she is. She's a rare type of witch, which is actually a siphon. So the whole kind of storyline in WandaVision is based off of the fact that in the long run, she tries to pretty much suck Wanda dry of all of her powers and make herself entirely overpowered. We do see a little bit of her background in which we see her mother and her mother's coven, this is actually important when it comes to witches, whose coven is blue. They try to pretty much do away with her, try and punish her by killing her. And in doing so, she actually sucks the life out of all of them and sucks the magic out of them, because for witches, magic is essentially a life form. And her powers are purple, just as a reminder. Scarlet Witches is, of course, scarlet. And we'll be introducing another color as we reach another witch as we go down the line here. But I do want to just remind everybody, or for the first time, for those of you who don't remember that little tidbit, that's pretty important. Also, where we left off and where this show will pick up is Agatha was technically trapped in a spell brought on by Wanda. Wanda supposedly in 616 is dead. So it looks like we're picking up right from her being stuck in this spell and breaking free of it, and then also trying to, repower herself essentially because she doesn't have any inherent power herself.
Yeah. So I think to your point, that's going to play very heavily into the plot of this show, as we know that they're going to go down the witch's road to basically regain Agatha's powers. So, yes, being a siphon is a huge part of her character, as was introduced in WandaVision. And appreciate you adding that little bit of color because, again, that is super, super important to keep in mind, especially if you have not seen WandaVision. I'm going to take this moment to say if you haven't seen it or if you haven't seen it in a while, it could be good to just brush up on it. The first few episodes are really short anyway, and you can kind of breeze through them because I think it will, knowing this is a direct sequel, it will help just play off of, recognizing things that happen in the show, seeing foreshadowing, little details about Agatha, being able to call back to those details, as we see this show and things like that. So I'm going to try to watch as much of WandaVision as I can before this show premieres, but highly, highly recommend it for y'all as well, especially if you haven't seen it, because I think you might be a little lost if you don't watch.
Or if you're a fairly regular rewatcher, I know I've at least seen WandaVision 3 or 4 times. Just maybe watch episodes 7 through 9.
Yeah,
If that might be all you need.
fair enough. Fair enough. All right, moving into witch number 2, which kind of gets into what you were talking about with the importance of colors in witchcraft, which is Rio Vidal, which is actually Aubrey Plaza's character. So, y'all definitely know who Aubrey Plaza is from Parks and Rec, most famously. This character is actually original to the MCU. So, Rio does not exist in the comics. She is, like I mentioned, a green witch. And some people are saying she might be kind of a version of the Emerald Warlock from the comics, kind of, gender swap to make her fit better into this narrative and Agatha's story, kind of like we've seen, with past characters. And the Emerald Warlock is someone who actually fights Wanda in the comics. So unclear how much of a tie there is between this, original character and that character that exists in the comics. Except to Katie's point, they do have very similar color of power, which is very telling and quite a little bit of a hint, if you ask me.
Yeah, and the one thing I kind of want to add is something a little interesting. So, part of why she is a green witch is because it's rumored a lot of her powers could be coming from the earth and she has more earthly types of magic. But another rumor is that, and now I want to say Gia, it might be Gaia, but we already have a Gaia in the MCU. So, for the sake of this, I'm going to call her Gia. It is possible that she's also playing the role of the goddess Gia, who is the Earth Mother. Very powerful. If you're a Percy Jackson fan, you're triggered by this. And the most important thing here is she's actually related, and by related, I mean sibling to Chthon, who should sound pretty familiar to all of you, especially as we're having a conversation around the Scarlet Witch.
Yes, the source of her chaos magic, if you were not aware. So interesting. I did not know of that tie or those rumors. So that could be really cool to see more of those like demonic goddess level things that are even to me on a higher level than the gods that we saw, in Love and Thunder, which is like God level 2, but this is like God level 1. And like God level 1 is like intense, intense God level stuff. So that's cool. I love that, gods or demons, because Chthon is technically a demon, I think. So very interesting. I love that we're getting like deep into this whole thing. I know we got kind of rid of the dark hole, but the idea of like all of these demonic and, their counterpart powers being brought into the MCU in like a real way that's the focus of it. I think we touched on it in MOM, but we were dealing with the multiverse, and we touched on it in WandaVision, but we were really dealing with Wanda's psyche and like still trying to understand the origins and the depths of her power. That was kind of our introduction really into this realm of like demons and Chthon and potentially Mephisto, and they kind of go, relatedly sometimes. So I think I love that we're starting to really, now that we've got a little bit of a basis, and I think we got that too in MOM with some of the legends around the Scarlet Witch. now we can start to dive a little deeper. I think we're going to really, lean into the horror and things like that we've all seen in the trailers, but also within that, be able to explore that in a way that we couldn't before when we were just laying foundations.
Well, and there is so much to the magic realm that we've complained about the magic realm on various episodes for various reasons. But I think a lot of that comes down to we're really seeing so much of only the surface. Even with Kamertage and everything there, we're only seeing the surface of some really deep rooted stories. And the thing about magic, same with like the gods kind of idea as well, is that these are deep rooted. I mean, Loki and Thor come out of Norse mythology.
Mhm.
Obviously, Gia comes out of mythology as well. So there is background to this. And even with the magic, there is background to these stories. There's lore, if you will.
I mean, they brought in the Salem witch trials. So there's all kinds of stuff.
Exactly. And I think they were only kind of scraping the surface. And I think for the first time with Agatha's show specifically, we're actually going to be seeing a lot more of a deeper dive into the connections and the world of magic and the witches and warlocks that walk within it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's probably what I'm most excited about is to like dive into this world that we've only gotten tastes at or hints at. And look, I appreciate that like you have to set the foundation before you're able to truly like grasp the gravity and the size of what is going on. Like magic is its own world, not in that it's like its own universe or anything, but like it has its own ecosystem, it has its own players and things like that. And like you can't just go into that completely blind. That
Right.
would be a really miserable experience. So I'm appreciative to things like, WandaVision and MOM and even, the first Doctor Strange movie, for giving us that very, very, very tiny glimpse into what magic could be and has started to evolve into, especially in the last few years. But now that we have that foundation, we have these names like Chthon and Mephisto starting to like percolate in our heads, we can now go in there more informed and say, well, we know this, and we know these characters, we know these players, we know this about magic, and we can actually start to enjoy the realm because we have enough background to be able to say, all right, I understand why this is happening.
Exactly. So I do think this should be pretty interesting. This is also one of the things I'm most excited about with this show, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out in the long run. Obviously, we do have technically another follow up to Agatha already coming with Vision Quest or whatever it's being called at this point, but that is obviously most likely not really going to relate as much to the witches as you're going to see in this show.
Yeah, agreed. Alrighty, moving into a character that we've already talked about, so we're not going to spend too much time diving back into. But the next character on my list, at least, is Billy Kaplan. And so we talked about him because he is a member of the Young Avengers. Definitely recommend checking out that show for a little bit of a deeper dive. But essentially, quick hits on Billy. He is Wanda's son slash has the soul of Wanda's son, who was not real but was created through the use of Chthon and chaos magic and that whole interesting kerfuffle storyline. So he has the soul of Wanda's Billy. He goes by Wiccan, and he is married to Teddy Altman, who is Hulkling, another member of the Young Avengers. Anything I'm missing, Kate? Or I think we hit the highlights on Billy.
No, that's pretty much the highlights. The only thing I'll add is I was reading his character in this show is a fan, supposedly, of Agatha, and that could be wrong, but that's what I was reading. He admires her and wants to join her on the Witch's Road. So, pretty much, it sounds like he's just going to be fangirling the entire time, which I'm kind of here for. We'll see. That's just the rumors and what we're hearing straight from, and I can't remember his name, but the actor who plays Wiccan slash Billy's mouth.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. This is a character that we have not talked about yet in any of our podcasts, which is Lilia Calderu, played by Patty Lupone. So, this character actually has ties to Doctor Strange in the comics. She is able to glimpse what is going to happen, and she can also manipulate minds and change her appearance. So, a very interesting witch to have in your coven if you're Agatha, with some good powers to help you get down the witch's road or siphon off or, fight whoever you need to fight, whether that's the Scarlet Witch. Probably can't go too far up against the Scarlet Witch, but if you're fighting a magical being, not a bad person to have in your corner.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting character. Like, I'm really excited. The more I just read about this, about meeting the different witches and where they come from and their abilities, because we are starting to see a hodgepodge of all sorts of different witches, I think, come into this, all of whom are looking for a coven. That's kind of the whole idea. So, like, I also hope we get to explore why they don't seemingly have a coven. That should be a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sinister found family storyline. Like they're all coming at it with their own motivations, their own backstories, their own potentially murky and gray area backstories. Like were they kicked out? Did they murder their covens? TBD. All of that good stuff. And, you
The world
know,
may never know.
yeah, I mean, I hope we do get to find out. Like, I hope that that's part of unveiling or like unraveling, unpeeling the onion for each character is that we get to dive deeper into that. But I do think it will be interesting to see, you know, how they all come together with their variety of powers, personalities, backgrounds, and things like that to become this kind of found family if it's not something that turns a little more sinister as they continue down the witch's road.
Yeah, and I think Marvel's seen a lot of success with this kind of found family idea or just like team up idea of a bunch of people who didn't necessarily always want to be there, but they ended up there. I think it could work. And the idea of a coven is to have people who pretty much have your back. They're your like go to people. So I do think if you're going to go with that idea, you do need to eventually create this kind of trusting bond with one another. It's not a casual thing to be in a witch's coven. Let's just put that out there.
Well, yeah, and there's so much, you know, that goes into fighting alongside someone with magic, you know, exposing that part of yourself, I think can be very vulnerable as well, especially, you know, if you grew up in a time where magic was frowned upon, that's something that you're not really going to do because you have fear maybe tied to using your powers and things like that. So, to your point, I think watching them develop as a group, build trust, all of that will be really interesting throughout the series. And I'm excited to see two levels as they develop as a group, but also more as they are revealed to us as individuals and we can grow to know and love them. And then moving on to another new character within this coven. Jennifer Kale, played by Sashir Zamata, and apologies if I'm butchering her name. I actually know her from the Modern Economics or Family Economics, Home Economics. Anyway, it's the show with
One
Topher
of
Grace.
those. But I know what
Yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah, it was on ABC. It
I
was a
think
show
it's
with
home
Topher Grace.
economics.
Something like that. And it's just a cute, like very much in the vein of like the middle or Modern Family, just like a sitcom about like the weirdness that comes from being a sibling and having family ties and all that good stuff. So anyway, Sashir Zamata, that's what I know her from. She plays Jennifer Kale. She has a really interesting background and a tie to a very fascinating character that I want to point out, and we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing, just a little bit of background, she has powers tied to an Atlantean sorceress. She comes from a place in Florida that is a nexus of all realities. I just want that to sink in. A nexus of all realities. She comes from that place. Let's just, you know, think about all of the things that could come from that. We've been talking about nexus beings. We thought we had a nexus place or whatever related in Spider-Man and we didn't, but the whole, you know, Westview is at a nexus point, all of that, we're bringing back the nexus through Jennifer Kale. I think it would be a huge miss if they don't talk about that aspect of this character and bring that through from the comics, since we have been talking so much when it relates to the Scarlet Witch about Nexus beings, and the word Nexus that I just said 30 times in the last minute has been said a lot in relation to the mystical realm. One of the things that I think is coolest about her is that she has ties to Man Thing, who you might be like, Man Thing? What? Why does that sound semi familiar? Man Thing was introduced to us in Werewolf by Night, which never got a follow up, which is kind of a bummer because that was really good and those characters are really interesting. Maybe we'll see them again, especially as we get into things like Blade, Midnight Suns, that kind of fantasy realm almost portion of the mystical.
Supernatural.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. But either way, he was in that, and she and he have like almost like a symbiotic friendship relationship going on. And I would love to see him, even if it's in a flashback, just because we haven't seen the character in like what, 2 years. It'd be really cool to make that tie even outside of, that little holiday special that we got. She has this thing called the Tome of Zered Na, which is a pretty hefty magical book. So, she has that in her possession. I would kind of liken it to like a dark hold. Not that it's necessarily, dark magic or things like that, but that it is kind of one of those like magical elements that someone can use as a spell book and things like that. That was my understanding of that. And she has ties to Doctor Strange and Mordo. She collaborates with the Midnight Suns, Elektra, and Maria Hill. And Johnny Blaze, Ghost Rider, is her cousin. This girl has connections all over.
Yeah, and I just want to expand on a few of those. One being Mordo, because he actually tries to kidnap her at one point.
Chill.
Go him. And listen, you know what? Where his storyline ended in our universe still could happen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to write that one off. And the only other one I want to add to is Doctor Strange. Yes, she has ties. She does actually pretty much go under him as an apprentice at one point. However, he gets himself in some trouble. What else is new? Has to give up being Sorcerer Supreme. And he actually initially goes to turn to her and then is like, ooh, you're not good for this job either. So keep that in mind. He actually passes her up as Sorcerer Supreme to follow him or to lead beyond him. So I thought that was kind of interesting that she is one of those characters that almost was defender of the entire earth and of what do they call them in Doctor Strange? I'm trying to think of what they call them. Not realms.
The
but
Sanctum Sanctorum.
Yes, of the Sanctum Sanctorum. I can't say that.
What I
Sanctum
said.
Santorums.
I think that's close. That's what I said.
think
I don't even know
we
if
all
I'm
know
getting
what
it
I'm
right.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think, with all of the ties that she has, I hope she's a character that really expands beyond this show and finds her footing in other properties and with other characters, whether that's with Man Thing or Doctor Strange, and she makes her way to Kamar-Taj, or she shows up in whatever iteration of Ghost Rider, wherever he shows up. Maybe she does a quick cameo. I think this character has a lot of opportunity to really create connections and, tie some things together that we've already seen, bring in new things and tie those really neatly into the things that are already existing. So I have a lot of hopes for this character because I think we've been struggling a lot in phases 4 and 5 with characters who are fantastic but aren't having the ties that we need to really make it feel like a unified universe. And I think she's a character who, because of so many of her ties in the comics, can really be a bridge for a lot of things. And so I'm hoping that that's, where they take her and that this is just a springboard for her to show up in other things and bring the magical realm together moving forward.
And just to add, I think in general, we need to expand the magical world. I mean, we really have only had Kamar-Taj and we've had anything that relates to the Scarlet Witch. We haven't had much more than that. So I do think this is a great character, as you were saying, to not just expand while also connecting characters and things, but to also be connecting ideas. Because I do think we have so many out there, and even to her origin being in a Nexus place, that should be critical when you have a Nexus being in your universe. Actually, we technically have two right now because America is in our universe currently.
Yep.
So I do think things like that can be easily tied to with this character. It'd be great to expand upon not just her, but of course, all the witches that come into this to expand our entire just witch knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. It's a realm that is beefy in the comics and needs to be beefier in the MCU.
Agreed.
And last but not least, we're going to talk about Alice Gulliver, played by Ali On or Ali On. I'm so sorry. I know I'm butchering names. I apologize. Hopefully, as they do press tours and things, we'll get better at pronunciation. So Alice is known as the Wu, operating in Hong Kong. What I think is cool about her is she actually combines weapons and magic. So basically, she uses magic as an extension of like your traditional weapon. And she has this sword like thing that can open doorways. And the reason that started sending, alarm bells in my head was I thought about Clea and her like weird scythe thing that she could use to basically open doors between dimensions. And I was like, ooh, interesting. Good to know that someone else who is potentially going to be in the show, has something that can do something similar. So, love that. Don't know if they're going to bring that into this show, but maybe it shows up down the road because I think objects like that, especially as we move through the multiverse, are going to be really important.
That is a good catch that that could be a connection and that that could also just be somebody else who has it. Maybe she only uses it to move across, I don't want to say space time because that is no longer simple, but just in universe uses it to move between places. Let's just say that. So maybe she doesn't actually have the ability to do it like Clea does with interdimensional kind of travel. Maybe she does. It would be very interesting to see that feature kind of added to this character. I also want to just say, as I was reading about her ability to pretty much add her magic to objects, I'm like, so she's a magical gambit, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Essentially, is the same idea. She puts a hex on, anything really, and uses it in that way, shape, or form to make it a more powerful weapon. So I already like this character. The only other thing I want to add, which is not related to this character, is actually a final character that I know was not on your list, but is important to maybe just drop in there, is Mrs. Hart. We'd probably be quite remiss if we didn't bring up the fact that she is in this, obviously returning from WandaVision. This is, I don't even know her real name. I just know her as Kitty from that 70s show. But that is that character, and the reason it's kind of important because a lot of people are speculating, because of the stills that she is in, there's a possibility she's actually a witch as well. So I do just want to throw that out there. There isn't like a specific name for her or who she could be from the comics as of yet, but there has been quite a bit of speculation that she's sitting there with Agatha and some of these other witches as they look to be entering the witch's road. Again, these are just stills and parts of trailers. Anything is possible. But I mean, I can't think they're just bringing random little Mrs. Hart with them. So, possibility is there that she's actually been a witch this whole time.
Yeah, which is super fascinating because unbeknownst to Wanda, she accidentally trapped two witches in her hex in Westview. So that would be really fascinating if that were the case, and I would be really into it.
Well, to be fair, she didn't technically accidentally trap Agatha. Agatha came looking.
Okay, see that's why I need to rewatch because I knew Agatha knew about it. Like she was aware earlier than everybody else, obviously, but I couldn't remember if she like came specifically because she recognized the magic or if she was already in Westview. So, good call out.
No, I'm pretty sure she like came looking for the hex. Like she knew. But as for Mrs. Hart, if she is a witch, she would have, to our knowledge, accidentally been trapped there. So that sentiment still stands.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating anytime, there's a quote unquote coincidence because no coincidences exist in the MCU. So I'm excited to see, what could happen with this character and why she was brought in, why she was brought back. I also just love the actress. I think she's the cutest little thing. Deborah Jo Rupp, like, love her to death. So I just am excited to see her back as like a fan too.
No, I am too. I love her as well. And that's her real name. Didn't really know
Yes,
that.
you're welcome.
I'm just like, that's Kitty Foreman right there. Like
Forever and always.
yeah, right? But yes, I am excited to see why she's brought back. I do think if let's just run across the idea that's theoretical that she happened to be brought into the hex on accident as a witch herself. To me, I read that as maybe there are just more witches out there than we've been allowed to see. That in this population of, let's say, 100, and I know they say in the show how many were actually trapped in the hex, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but let's say 100, there's a witch in there. Well, guys, let's multiply that by the entirety of the population of the world.
I mean, that's 1%.
Exactly. Well, that's what I mean. So think about how many people that could be a witch or a warlock walking around. So to your point, coincidences don't necessarily always just happen, but on the other side of that, that could be proving a very interesting statistic for us.
Yeah, it really could. And to something you were saying earlier, the idea of expanding the magical realm. I mean, what could do that more than finding out that there are hundreds of thousands of witches and warlocks in hiding, just pretending to be normal people because they're unable to use their powers freely because they would be looked down upon. Because I think, we all know, yes, enhanced individuals have some level of, I don't know that I would use the word privilege, but like a lot of them, especially when you think about the Avengers, are held to such high regard. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Schmo next door is going to get, received well if he shows that he has powers. I think it's reserved for a certain few who are put in a certain light and not necessarily the guy next door or the gal next door.
And let's not forget, we do have the Salem witch trials to fall back on
For
when we
sure.
look to see how that has gone in the past. Granted, I would hope if a bunch of witches started coming out of the woodwork in today's age, we weren't burning them at the stake. Just my personal hope for those out there. But I still don't know if they would be received very well. So I do agree with that. That might be very much why it's kind of kept on the DL. Plus, don't forget, you have people like the guy in the first Doctor Strange who Mordo goes and takes the magic from, who is only using magic to not be paralyzed anymore.
Yeah.
So you do have people like that who are trained in the mystic arts, but aren't necessarily just like setting fire to something or like using it to make things move around their kitchen. Like they're literally just using it for everyday, simple, not really hurting anybody kind of thing.
Well, then you do have the Mordos of the world. And to your point, I wonder if this is how they bring him in, finding out that he is, very much like in the comics and what we kind of expected after the first Doctor Strange, going after magic wielders, whether that's from Kamar-Taj or born with it. I would actually love to just close the loop. How many times have we complained about that particular end credit scene and never getting paid off, then having Mordo and MOM and still not paying it off, which of course it was a different guy, but we didn't know that necessarily from the trailers. So I would love for that to finally pay off in one way or another and do so, even if it's in a flashback of just showing one of these people being attacked by him. I think that could be amazing. And that's maybe, or their whole coven is, unfortunately, this sounds horrible that I'm like, I hope this happens, but like maybe we see that, their coven was killed or something by Mordo because he was doing what he was doing. Maybe he's moved from just taking the magic to killing magic wielders, or because if it's someone who a magic is like a life force to someone who's born with magic, like a witch or a warlock, right? It's a little different for Kamar-Taj because they're taught to embrace it.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, like if you take magic from a witch, well, you might as well have just killed her. So it would be interesting, an interesting little side plot if one of these witches is covenless because they were victims of Mordo.
It's interesting you said that because I was thinking that as you were going through it. Where does he draw the line? Because I can understand going after people from Kamar-Taj because to your point, they're being taught to tap into the mystic arts versus you do have witches and warlocks who are quite literally being born into this power, into covens, and covens are powerful. If there's one thing the originals especially has taught me, it is that covens are very powerful. So I do think it would be very interesting to kind of see him come back and see what that balancing act could be like. Will he go after witches and warlocks born into covens who inherently have this gift and these powers? Or are we just talking Kamar-Taj? I also think it was just important to show that distinction. Let's not forget that going into the show, we are talking about born witches and warlocks. Those who have come with powers already to the table, probably born into covens, to your point, that are now covenless for who knows for what reasons. Just like Agatha, she was born into a coven.
Yeah.
But she was a siphon and she didn't fit into a coven when she has to steal others' powers to be powerful herself. I will be very intrigued to see how that works out. And then obviously we said on the other side, Kamar-Taj very different. Let's not forget that. That's an important little tidbit as we go into this show.
For sure. We're starting to get a little bit into prediction territory. So we're going to call this episode complete because we're leaving it at just surface level background info. With that being said, we have our predictions episode next. So please make sure that you are following on your podcast platform of choice so you can stay up to date with us as we move closer and closer to the premiere of Agatha coming up on September 18th. Please also check out the website. As we always mention, it's a central hub to all things Sisters Assembled.
Go ahead and follow us on our social media platforms, which are listed in the show notes below. Follow us on all of them if you want. Just one, doesn't matter. Just keep up with the show with whatever way works best for you. And as Taylor said, next week we will be doing our predictions for Agatha All Along. We are very excited, so make sure you guys are tuning in for those. As Marvel just blew your mind, so let's talk about it.